cutting back some of the funding that the U.S. provides to the UN, and the UN is in panic mode. I mean, real tough austerity measures going on there. The UN, I don't know how what the current number is, but it was in the past around 25% of their budget came from the US taxpayers paying a lot of money to people who want to destroy the US and replace it with whatever type of totalitarianism they will agree on later. And yeah, I'm going to read a little bit from an article and maybe we'll read a bit more later. This is from Ynet News. Impoverished UN moves to, quote, austerity measures after Trump turns off cash tap. First report, the UN is taking emergency measures to prevent a budget collapse after the US under Trump stopped providing money. At the New York headquarters, the heating temperature will be lowered and maintenance work will be postponed. Translation services will be cut, meetings will be shortened, and reports will be delayed. A period of unprecedented uncertainty with a real impact of its ability to fulfill its mission. Yeah, who says we're only reporting bad news? I mean, this is a pretty good news story. Welcome to the reality show. I'm joined by Daniel, Michael, Alex. Alex, I'm gonna go to you first. Your thoughts on this? Is this the start of something beautiful, or is this, just another moment that will pass, unfortunately, in time, like the defunding of UNRWA by some European countries?
hmm Well, it's very interesting because as far as I understood, this whole discussion about, defunding the UN and leaving the UN even, it's kind of been on the cards since I believe like the kind of the mid 90s. They were kind of mulling that over and thinking, hey, should this be done? Should we do it? And the funding, the pulling away the funding, I have to say, it's just absolutely amazing. I think it really is the best news that I've heard in several months. It's it's just sends such a great signal to the rest of the world. It's this entire morally bankrupt organization, and I can't wait to see them actually bankrupt.
Yeah, I agree. Now, this isn't complete defunding of the UN by the US, but Michael, you saw a story that says that might be potentially in the works, or at least the fact that it's being discussed is a step forward.
No, I believe the Republicans are going to put forward a bill um, to totally defund, to withdraw all U.S. funding of the UN. And normally we would say with the Congress, that is the House of Representatives, it's a very close. The Republicans do have a majority. I think it's a three-person majority, uh, but remarkably, a rather large budget just passed. A Republican-led budget just passed there by two-vote margin. Um, Along party lines, pretty much, except for one Republican going to the other side. So you can get stuff done, and they need to get it through the House, and I think they would need to get it through the Senate, and that's a much clearer majority, 53-47. Um, this could really happen. I know it's very clear that Donald Trump wants it to happen. Part of his American First strategy is to say screw you to all of the people that are trying to screw the Western democracies, in particular the largest one, and especially the fact that the U.S. is the largest funder of the UN. And what do we get for it? We get really bad regimes giving us and Israel and most of our allies crap all the time, because the majority of people in the UN, majority countries in the UN, are bad countries. I mean, they're not democracies; they're dictatorships and theocracies and so on. So I'm very excited about this, and I'm glad he already pulled money from the absurd United Nations Human Rights Council. I mean, it's a joke, it's a travesty, and explaining that to kids, how Venezuela and Iran and places like that could be on the Human Rights Council, never mind sharing it many years. So I think it's terrific. It's time to stop with the doublespeak.
Yep, absolutely. PC says in the chat, I once respected the UN about 100 years ago when I was a woke 25-year-old fool. first of all, PC, you look young for your age, but that's a thing, people buy into this because of fancy words like human rights, and without actually looking into what's being done. How are these words actually, how do they mean what they're supposed to mean in the context of the UN? But yeah, in the UK, Nigel Farage was last year elected to Parliament on his eighth attempt, and which sounds like a politician who hasn't been very successful. But Nigel Farage, for the past few decades, was a one-issue politician. His one issue being Britain leaving the EU, and when he started off, the very idea was a joke. It was so fringe that nobody would have thought it could be done, and it was. I'm not a huge fan of Nigel, not a fan of Nigel Farage, period. I am a fan of Britain leaving the EU. But yeah, these things that seem very unlikely because our entire life, they were one way, and the idea is of changing them in a different way. Yeah, the fact that something currently is a certain way doesn't mean it has to be that way forever. And the fact that there is a conversation is a starting point. I mean, there's a conversation on this channel about leaving the UN, but now there's a conversation that's more mainstream. Daniel.
Yeah, someone in the chat says hopefully this is done right, unlike Doge. And I was also thinking about that. I think there is a big difference between those things. And so the first thing is sort of whenever with pretty much everything Trump has been doing, I had a large problem with because of the erratic nature that he has been doing it, which I think the biggest problem of that is how sustainable it is long term. Because yeah, he can do a bunch of executive orders and then it's going to be undone by more executive orders. So he stopped funding we shouldn't say he stopped funding because technically presidents don't even have the power of the purse. But basically, he delayed the payments that should go to the UN. Now, as Michael has mentioned, and I didn't know about this before, apparently some Republicans are thinking about putting a bill that would stop the funding in the UN. Now, what that would mean is also a question because there is voluntary funding for the UN and there is a mandatory funding for the UN that every nation has to do. And I don't really know about specifics if America can completely stop all the funding and basically still retain its seat. I wouldn't have a problem with them not keeping that seat, but that's something to keep in mind. When it comes to sort of being done right, there is no way to be it done wrong almost when it comes to something like Doge. I think the big problem is the chaos that it creates from just suddenly like changing everything without any plan and sort of any clear sort of, let's say, 4-year plan. That is not really the problem here. I don't care. Every single thing in the UN can get defunded, and there might be some marginal things that are good that might be better if there was like some heads up on, but I won't cry that many tears. And if that is the issue that there are some like important programs in the UN that we want to keep, let's just do it separately from the UN if USA wants that, and just keep it at that. And we are not even bringing into the picture that none of this is really the purpose of government and none of this should be done. But yeah, so overall, great thing. It's I always like to hate on Trump. It's hard to find that much. Yeah, especially if the bill passes, then this is amazing. So if this is the first step towards possibly some legislation, this is a great start.
Well, Roland sends a super chat that was something I was just about to address. Roland, thank you for the super chat. He says, I'd recommend moving their headquarters to Antarctica. Rent is a lot cheaper and they can save on the AC costs. Yes, but I have this running proposal, which I remind every time we talk about the UN. I remind of people of this. There's the I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but the Ryogyong Hotel in Pyongyang is a 330-meter tower, arrow-shaped tower that has been in the works for like 30 years. The exterior is completed. And, that's taller than the tallest building in Western Europe, by the way. That is the perfect place. It's already there. So yeah, go ahead and use that. And the UN headquarters is prime Manhattan real estate. Don't worry, we will find something to do with it. Yeah, in terms of there's one of the things that have come up since Trump was inaugurated was USAID and the crazy things they're wasting money on, much of which is hilarious and terrifying that this is what taxpayer money is going on. But what's worse than spending U.S. taxpayer money on teaching modern art to people in Afghanistan? Funding the UN. That is absolutely the worst thing that is being done with taxpayer money. So yeah, if this is a step, again, if this is a step in the right direction, let's take a few more steps and just do it. Alex.
Yeah, and I even thought it might be a good idea for Israel just to accept that whole. So Israel was going to be removed from the UN. All of the things that they're doing right now, it's really a movie that's happened over and over again. The original bid to remove Israel from the UN was back, I think, in 1973, if I'm not mistaken, or mid 1970s. Was a Soviet tactic whereby they said, okay, so we can actually like vote to have them removed, but we can just like bully the credential giving people. And, so basically they won't get credentials to be able to like be part of the UN or whatever. And there was a bill passed by the United States that said if Israel is ever banned from the United Nations, we will leave the United Nations. We will not fund it. And the original plan for the so-called Palestinians that UNRWA put forward in 1953 was relocation. So originally, UNRWA wanted to relocate the Palestinians. That was the whole, they wanted to relocate, I think it was 120 Arab refugees. They wanted to, basically relocate them to other countries. And Nasser blocked this, okay, wouldn't actually let it happen. And then it kind of just turned him into this sort of perpetual victim status. It's really quite astounding how the bureaucracy can get so far, kind of so entrenched, and then and then kind of make all of these new laws and make you pay them, make you fund them. The United Nations has turned into this kind of autocratic bullying mechanism for Western democracies, whereby China leverages its economic power over the various other member states, and Russia just bands around and just does whatever, and it's why on earth are they on the Security Council? I mean, what grand vision was that when you were forming the United Nations, which has failed in it's failed in its entire kind of mission? Wasn't the entire mission that it was supposed to prevent war? Like the League of Nations, it's of course it's failed to live up to that mandate. So I don't know what on earth is it. Let's imagine this stuff really was, the purpose, right, of governments. What? They fail at everything they do. It's everything. They can't manage to figure out, how to advance human rights, right? Because you bring on North Korea and you bring on Cuba and onto these kind of human rights organizations, and it just makes a mockery out of it. I don't know. I can't really think. Can you think of anything that the UN actually does that is worth something?
No, but I disagree with they fail at everything they do, because they fail at it if you take them at their word. But you shouldn't. They're actually, and Corey says here in the chat, UNRWA schools were literally the Palestinian version of Hitler Youth. And that's true. And in that sense, they succeeded. They were a massive success. And there were countries in Europe, as I mentioned, there were countries in Europe when the UNRWA teachers scandal first came out last year, who initially defunded UNRWA, then went back to funding like shortly thereafter. There were countries like Norway that immediately doubled their funding of UNRWA. So it's nice to see somebody at least pushing back on this to some extent, and I'd like to see more of that. And yeah, just generally, I mean, the idea of government accountability, and we will probably do an episode about some of the USAID stuff at some point soon. But yeah, the fact that now these things are people are looking into this. This is terrifying for so many people have been getting rich doing very bad things with zero accountability at the government's expense, specifically the U.S. government's expense. And again, I think of all the weird things you heard from USAID, nothing comes near the level of the UN. Michael.
Yeah, so I have a different opinion than of you guys than the Doge opinion that's been out there. I do believe the USAID uncovering was one of the first things that Doge did, and is part of it. I also would say that Trump picked Musk on purpose because the guy's a businessman, and the reason it's chaotic is because when you're the CEO of a company and you tell people to do something, and they say no, you tell them there's the door. And we all understand that in the government as it's currently conceived, this giant bureaucracy of baloney, where accountability is minimal. I mean, I think the 6% of the U.S. government actually goes to the office, 6% before Doge got involved. And even J.P. Morgan had a higher number that before Jamie Dimon put his foot down and was caught off mic in private screaming about the whiny little spoiled kids who refuse to come to the office. Be like, fire them. I think the adults have finally had enough of it, and it's about time. And I think there's no easy way to fix a giant cancer that's been growing on all of us, and the cancer is most of the U.S. government and probably most Western governments. And I don't really care about the non-Western style governments because they're corrupt in their own way, and who really cares? But that's what Doge is designed to do. And I don't think there's a constructive way to do that. These people they've been arguing and talking about reducing government waste for the last 30 years. I mean, every time you watch a clip about this, they go back 30 years ago, with Bill Clinton talking about it and people before him, and it's just completely ballooned. The UN is yet another example of not only government waste, but like we said about USAID, and there's a lot of AID, there's a lot of similarities between USAID and the UN, which is to say most of what they're funding is not in America's best interest, at least not for the 51% or 49% of Americans that voted for Donald Trump and believe that a government should be careful with people's tax money. And it's just an extension of this crap that has been thrown at us. The UN, like USAID, which has a nice acronym on purpose. Well, who could argue with a name like United Nations? How could anyone argue with the United Nations Human Rights Council? It's like saying when somebody says, I have a benign tumor. Well, it might be benign to the doctor, but it's not benign to most patients. I mean, there are some benign tumors that are truly benign, but almost everybody wants to have their benign tumor removed too. For the most part, these are cancers. These are malignant cancers that will kill you. And the way they're killing Western democracies is by using more and more tax money and producing nothing. By the way, it's estimated that every dollar of government spending could be converted to $5 of private sector spending, which makes the economy 5 times bigger for that element that went to the government. This notion that that's because government is so inefficient. They don't do anything. They do some good things, but not much. And the UN, the only thing I could think of actually was the United Nations heritage sites, UNESCO and so on, where they go and they declare it the United. I'm sure we can get a historical society to jump up and take that job over. I don't think we need the UN for that. So I actually think Doge is great. I don't think there is a it's just like ripping off a Band-Aid. I think there's going to be a lot of screaming. Do you see almost exclusively the Democrats are screaming because they're being found out, and they're actually arguing. The Democrat platform now is that the government should not be policing itself. That this money is their money to spend, i.e., the Democrats' money to spend, not the taxpayers' money. And the same thing with the United Nations. The United Nations is an evil, corrupt institution whose time has long gone, and like any cancer, it needs to be removed.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the first thing that Democrats don't want to fund the policing of. And yeah, I don't disagree with you on Doge. I mean, I'll give it some time and see what it does, but I certainly love the idea. And yeah, generally speaking, you know, in the productive sector, if you're successful, you end up with more money. In the government sector, if you're unsuccessful, you say, well, I need more funding.
Need more money, yeah.
Yeah. Daniel.
Yeah, so just quickly on that, Elon Musk hasn't discovered anything. Again, there is a difference between the funding we don't like and fraud. Anything he has found, there is not a single piece of fraud he has found. Everything
Well,
he
the
found.
Social Security Administration is full of fraud.
No,
I mean, you can't be
nothing
sending checks
big.
to people that are over 100.
Yeah, and
No, they
there
have
are there are no checks being sent. He didn't find anything
no,
like
they
that.
are. They're being cashed. No. There's there's hundreds of thousands of people that are listed as over 100 years old. They're known to be.
Yeah, and no
they're
one is
known.
getting money from that.
Well, but the checks are being cashed.
No, they are not. That's the thing.
Huh?
Yaron Brook has also looked into it, and many people did. That it's simply not happening. But I think there is like a different thing that's happening. There is also the thing of the I think a large violation of the separation of powers when it comes to the fact that Doge has almost like unlimited powers in many ways, even when it comes to cutting sort of spending, which again is not the role of the executive. If you don't like US aid, put a bill through. Republicans are in power, get rid of US aid. I'm for it. But don't hide behind this sort of like, oh, we are just cutting some stuff or cutting things and then
Daniel,
use
I
it to
think for the
bash
money to come
Democrats.
back in, I think for the money to come back in, I understood that Congress does have to. They have all this rules about reconciliation, and they have to actually do what you're saying. I think Doge's job is to identify this stuff, and then you're right; it doesn't have any immediate power to bring the money back
Yeah,
in.
but it's doing that. That's the problem. In many cases, it's doing that, and judges have to stop a lot of it happening. I think a lot of like clear like overstepping of the executive is happening. Again, fundamentally, of course, I disagree with that. I want it gone. We have tools for getting rid of that, but setting up this almost like extra governmental organization that somehow is both executive, somehow it's also has power to legislate, and somehow even can like basically judge on things is I think a large overstepping. And again, it's not something we need. If there is a real desire to sort of get rid of USA, we can do that. Similar to when it comes to the UN. Yes, this is like a start we can put, but the end of it should be completely stopping it through bill, because that's the job of legislature. It's not the job of president. It's not the job of Elon Musk to appropriate funding. That's a clear violation of the constitution, and I think sets up a very scary precedence. But sort of going back to the UN, I think, I'm not sure if Razi or Alex has asked if there was anything positive that was ever done by the UN. So I tried to look it up. Apparently, there is like a UN intellectual property thing when it tries to sort of harmonize intellectual property. When it like gets accepted in one country, it gets easier to accept in other countries. So I guess that's something. It could be done separately from the UN. Obviously, it's not necessary to do. But there was one thing that I always found, like international organization that harmonizes intellectual property law was always something I would like. And apparently, you also have the World Trade Organization, which I think has many really bad things, but apparently also tries to sort of make free trade easier. To what extent they've been able to do it, I don't know. But again, that's a separate organization that we can completely separate from the UN. The main purpose of the UN was so dictatorships have a place to bash the Western nations for what they've been doing, and we also have to pay for the building they bash us in. I think it's like a clear sort of showing, or sort of the final stage of altruism. You have to pay people to say how bad you are because you are able to produce. And I think that's pretty much what has been happening with the UN. If not from the start, at the very least for most of its existence.
Yeah, for the people complaining, all panelists get to speak one after the other. Even if you disagree with what we say, we will get to say it. But you know what I would really like to do in my turn is continue reading from this article, which is fun to read. So U.S. President Donald Trump is withholding the transfer of several budgets to the United Nations so far, and the international organization, which is currently experiencing a serious economic crisis due to a sharp decline in its financial resources, has been forced to take drastic measures. According to a letter obtained by Ynet, the UN headquarters in New York has already begun making significant cuts, which are affecting the organization's ongoing activities. Among the steps taken, cutting translation services, reducing live broadcasts of plenary debates, stopping holding meetings after 6 p.m., shortening the length of reports by 10%, limiting the number of meetings with translation and interpretation services, delays in producing official minutes, lowering the temperature in the offices to save on heating costs, and even closing one of the main entrances to the UN headquarters on 42nd Street in Manhattan. I mean, I don't know, Alex. I don't know how they can survive this. But yeah, assuming even without further defunding the UN, 21 degrees is like that's Celsius. That's you need some heavy jackets to make it through that. We lost Daniel, but I think we're still live.
I do believe we lost everybody, I think. No? Okay, we're
I can hear you.
still live.
Yeah, we're still live. Daniel will be
Okay.
back shortly, but some of the people in the chat caught their wish.
No.
Alex.
Yeah, so I think it's actually astounding because is this a genocide against the UN? I don't know. I mean, that is pretty cold. It does feel to me a little like genocide. I hope they're okay. Hopefully they'll survive it. Yeah, and I did also just want to say a little something about USAID. There has been fraud. There was somebody who was charged with taking $9 million and transferring it to the Jabhat al-Nusra, which is the al-Nusra Front. So that is illegal. But if USAID closes, then how will Dr. Michael and I we'll have to fund our sex change clinic in Cuba that we were going to open up for animals. We were going to open up a pet sex change clinic in Cuba, and now we're just not going to be able to do that. Or I guess Michael will have to pony up some of his money, and I guess I'll have to get some kind of grant, maybe from the UN. Well, this is the thing, if you the entire thing, why these bodies, I simply cannot. They're worthless, right? Totally worthless. Even the whole thing where they get together and they go, "Oh, will you vote for me and I'll vote for you?" Okay. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, I want to like invade my neighbor and I want to kill them. But tell you what, I'll let you do it, and you vote for me and I'll vote for you. Like it's the prom or something. It's this ridiculous popularity contest. No one there is, principled. But I think previously, sort of in the 90s, it really should have been closed, right? After the end of the Cold War, it would have been a nice idea for them to just say, okay, I mean, they should have done it a long time ago, right? But they should have just said, hang on, guys, let's go. We won the war. Let's go. But instead, they stuck around. And I don't know if you remember what a big deal it was back in, when was it? 2002, when France refused to support the United States with the war in Iraq. What a big deal that was. What a diplomatic shit show it was for the United States, and it was for France. It was outrageous. Look how far things have, fallen since then. And I think that there was all of the kind of the Soviet, war against Israel in the United Nations that had gone on, really since the 60s. And then you had kind of this sort of lull in that, and then boom, it's right back at the Durban Conference, 2002. And since then, it's been, how quaint of us to kind of think like, oh, remember when France didn't support us at the UN? Oh, those scallywags, right? It's the kind of stuff that goes on there today. It's like, it's truly disgusting. You have you have actual terrorists, and people are like, yeah, well, maybe we need to get their opinion on what. And it's this kind of thing that I was talking to Daniel about today, and I was saying, oh, it's like they're kind of the United States is going, hang on a minute, there's all of these fires, right, all the time, and here the UN, they're always like coming to the fire and putting out the fire. Do you think that they're connected somehow? Maybe they're setting the fires. It's like it's taken this long, but we found out, yes, they're setting the fires. Okay. And the other country, I think, that's setting the other, also all the other NGOs that Qatar is funding as well. It's also, setting a bunch of fires.
Yeah, by the way, first of all, Alex, trans pets are pets, okay? And yeah,
Yeah.
WUB says sex change for cockroaches in Laos. That's funny
There
enough
you go.
to read it. And by the way, the France thing, it wasn't just that they were going to vote against the U.S., which for some reason thought they needed another resolution, more permission from the UN to go to war. But it was France going around to all these different countries, convincing them to vote with them. And it turned out that Jacques Chirac had some personal financial reasons to not want this war to happen, which was not at all a surprise. Michael.
Yeah, I think there are sort of three areas that we've discussed previously on this show of the UN, which are part and parcel to what we're talking about. The first one is the number of resolutions against Israel is greater than any other country in the world, and it's greater than North Korea, Iran, and Venezuela, and any other really bad company and country. And Daniel points out to me correctly that if you add up all of the other UN resolutions against every other country except Israel, they don't equal the number. It's less than the number of resolutions against Israel. That's point one. By the way, Israel is the only Middle Eastern country where women are equal to men. I am not aware of a single Middle Eastern country where women and men have the same level of rights. We're not talking, forget about LGBTQ and all the other supporters of the progressive left. We're talking about women, the 51% of the population in the world. The second one, of course, is our friends from UNRWA. When UNRWA started, the number of Gazans was de minimis. Alex gave some nice numbers at the beginning of this. Very small numbers, less than 200,000. And the numbers now are close to 2 million. Of course, this is a genocide because the Israelis have committed genocide. It's the only genocide in history where the number of people has gone up by an order of magnitude rather than down. And what's beautiful about what UNRWA has helped create is that it helped create some of the poorest, most destitute, and most well-militarized parts of the world. So not only was it a failure in terms of the things that the UN is supposed to do, but it was actually a failure in militarizing terrorists to kill innocent people. So it was a double whammy. It wasn't just not good. It was really maliciously bad. It was one of the most evil things on the planet right now, probably save for what's going on in Sudan and North Korea. And the third one, of course, is the other side of Israel, which is UNIFIL, which is the United Nations group that's supposed to take care of Lebanon, which they did a great job keeping Hezbollah south of the from infiltrating south of the Litani River line. And we all know that that's been a dismal failure. And not only did they not do it, but they were colluding with Hezbollah, just as UNRWA was colluding with Hamas. And the war that was just fought in the north by Israel, which was to basically bomb the heck out of southern Lebanon, and then, in fact, have to go above the Litani line, because let's face it, it's a little bit stupid now, because missiles can go a lot further than they used to go. So this arbitrary thing of, pretty much Beirut or thereabouts is ridiculous. All of Lebanon can hit all of Israel with the missiles that Iran supplies and Qatar pays for. So it is a totally disastrous organization. This is not even mentioned what's going on in Sudan and the civil war and the hundreds of thousands of people that are dead there, in Syria and everywhere else. The UN is a complete and total failure. And what has happened is bureaucrats love to get up on their pulpits and talk about it because they say it's the United Nations. And the name itself, which is doublespeak, if you all don't know that reference, that's to George Orwell's 1984. It's when governments it's like calling undocumented aliens instead of illegal aliens. No, there's a law that says you have to enter a country legally. If you don't, you're illegal. They're not undocumented. They are also undocumented, but they are illegal. And this is what's happened to the world. And we, the taxpayers, have put up for it with it. And we, the taxpayers, have continued to elect despicable, corrupt people in our own countries that continue to talk about this. I am very hopeful, and I am more optimistic than most on the show, that Donald Trump has had enough of this. And he's disgusted with it, just as the taxpayers in the United States should be. Let's see if it sticks. I hope it does. I hope they go and they shut down. It should effectively kill the UN. And I think this would be a very welcome genocide. I would call it euthanasia. I think it's time to put it out of all of our misery. And it would be great to take the $18 billion a year or whatever we spend in the US and do something else with it.
Yeah, and we'll all be better off, even the youth in Asia. Thank you, John. Sorry, they can't all land.
An old joke.
John says in the chat, ARCUK video on Jeff Bezos' recent announcement when? Well, luckily Daniel can walk and chew gum at the same time, and he sent me the article of what this is about. So probably tomorrow. Yeah, this is a big story. The headline is Jeff Bezos orders Washington Post opinion pages to support, quote, personal liberties and free markets. Top editor resigns. We'll look into it, but yeah, that's not bad. Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, so the big part of the UN is, of course, the UN resolutions, which do not have any legal binding, any binding at all. They are pretty much just opinions, but they're opinions that are being used. You can always say, well, Israel had 20 resolutions brought it up since October 7. I mean, are we going to do something about it? It doesn't really matter what it is about. It doesn't matter who voted which way. It doesn't matter if it was passed or not. It's just there were resolutions. Now people are arguing in the chat between Ukraine and Israel, saying that Israel in the recent vote voted against Ukraine. Basically, there was a vote condemning the Russian aggression on Ukraine. It was at the anniversary of at the 3-year anniversary of the invasion. Both the United States, Israel joined a bunch of dictatorships in voting against it. Now again, that thing doesn't hold any ground. It doesn't mean anything. It's still a bit disappointing both for the US and Israel to vote against it. Some people are saying, why should Israel vote for it if Ukraine always voted against Israel, which is a fair point. But again, you're being divided up by the UN. You are going by what the UN vote was and how countries voted. You could find justification for Israel. Israel wanted to appease the United States. Ukraine wanted to appease its Western allies to continue supporting it. It shows the despicable nature of the mixed economy and sort of mixed morality we have in the West right now. But it shouldn't be used as like a condemning or like a total condemnation that because of this one vote or because of the past votes, now Ukraine is done for or Israel is done for. It's a disappointing thing, but it's what the UN does. It unifies dictatorships. It unifies many of these really bad things. Um, and yeah, so this is what the UN does. And even if there is a, the more important UN Security Council resolution, like when we talk about the UNIFIL and when it comes to the southern Lebanon, it actually that does is also not binding because yeah, it might include some action that will be done, such as UN peacekeepers being in the southern Lebanon, but they won't do their missions, so it's actually as much of an opinion as any other UN resolution. So this is what it always is. Maybe it's some secret agenda to basically say, well, the UN has too little power to actually enforce its Security Council resolutions. So maybe it needs more power. I haven't yet seen that many calls for it, mainly because probably it's not in the benefit of pretty much any country, Western or dictatorship, for UN to have more power. So far it's just gonna be this place where we give moral sanction to the dictatorships, but not that much more.
Thank you, Roland, for the super chat. Roland says, I want a gender change operation for my bonsai tree. Will you guys be able to provide that? Well, actually, we recently added, Midas Mulligan was our highest membership level at 500 pounds. We recently added a higher level, 5 million pounds a month. That is one of the perks. It's called the Gutierrez membership level. So sign up for that and we will provide it. By the way, PC says Gutierrez is the worst Secretary General of my lifetime. Earlier on, PC, you indicated that you are 125 years old. So I don't necessarily know that Gutierrez is the worst, but it's there's competition there. And thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says, Razi, I said this before, the UN facility in New York City has a lot of potential once UN exits and a 3-year deep clean is done. Yes, I don't want to go in there right after those people leave. Should we read a bit more of the article just because it's fun? So the article continues. According to the letter signed by the UN Secretary General's Chief of Staff, Earl Courtney Rattray, these steps are necessary to ensure that the organization can continue to operate at least until the end of the year. Quote, without immediate spending restrictions, we will not be able to meet our financial obligations from September to December, the document states. It was also emphasized that due to the severity of the situation, the drastic measures taken last year will also continue with new restrictions added to all key UN departments. The impact of the measures is evident in every aspect of UN activity. For example, official meetings will only be held between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. and discussions outside these hours, including on weekends, will only take place if funding for this comes from external sources. UN bodies that hold 10 or more meetings a week will be required to reduce them by 10%. I have to pause there. I mean, like when we have meetings at ARCUK, there's a purpose for them. Like there's a specific reason. I don't know, like if you could just reduce them by percentage. It's not just a okay, we were supposed to have this many meetings every week, and now we're going to reduce them. But maybe I don't know how things work in the real world. Alex.
I love the idea of them sitting around by talking by candlelight, or I love the idea of them like sitting around kind of cold, going, oh, I really miss the good old days when we used to be able to have, $50 lattes in the middle of the Turtle Bay, right? Which is like one of the I mean just prime real estate, right? I I cannot wait for this to degrade even further. I really do welcome. Maybe it is a realistic fantasy that they could actually leave. I mean, they have to eventually trigger something which takes them kind of over the mark. Um, and this has just been, you know what they remind me of? They're sort of like the World Economic Forum. Okay, they're sort of like this weird sci-fi kind of organization, that's all kind of like, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if we had like a global government and we could I like get together and we could all like vote and we could all discuss what we're gonna do. It's crazy. It's totally stupid as well. I mean, of course it can't, it could, even the whole idea that kind of Daniel mentioned a minute ago with the intellectual property, yeah, it doesn't mean anything because, yeah, okay, fine, they've standardized it a little bit, but what does it really matter? China just, steals everything from everybody through actual stealing. It's not kind of like just, oh, I'm going to copy you. No, they send malware out in emails and they extract information and they reverse engineer things. They even put spies in all these kind of various companies as well, to extract information. So yeah, I don't know. It really puts me in pain to think about like just Israel sitting there like, why don't you guys love me? Why don't you guys like me? I'm a good person. Oh, it's it's whiny, it's pathetic, it's needy. And the whole thing about, yeah, Israel voted against Ukraine. Well, yeah, Ukraine voted against Israel 200 times over the past, I think it's like, in total, they've never voted with Israel. Whereas, and it shows you the performative nature of the entire thing because Israel supports Ukraine tremendously militarily. They give them weapons that they've confiscated from, Russia. And that was kind of twofold. It was signaling as well to the Russians, hang on, guys, if you guys continue to provide weapons to every two-bit terrorist organization in the world, maybe we'll confiscate it and maybe we'll give it to the Ukrainians. And there's a bottomless pit in terms of in terms of where that kind of comes from. And also it helped Ukraine, right? Which is something that is in Israel's self-interest to do. Okay. Russia is truly evil. The Wagner group trains Hamas. So it's in Israel's self-interest. And if they just follow what their self-interest is, it aligns with Ukraine. Whereas this entire thing in the UN, it's like useless. Who cares? It's a popularity contest. And with that being what it is, yeah, I voted against you in my popularity contest because you didn't like me when in the popularity contest. I'm evil and I'm spiteful. That's what the UN is. It's a group of teenage girls.
I have to say, Alex, when you do your leftist tone of voice, I can see the next ARCUK mock trial. Although I usually play the leftist, yeah, you might play it better. Michael, companies also sometimes have more money or less money, and they do things like, for example, if you're in a tough spot, you might move out of your Manhattan office into like Hoboken. That's a thing that people do. I don't see that being raised as a possibility. Or cutting staff. I mean, I think the UN probably, much like every government out there, probably has more staff than they need.
Yeah, of course they do. Look, one of the things I like, I mean, one of the many things I like about Trump and Doge and Musk is that I think they're trying to inject some business rules into government. Government, and we can see how fat and bloated it is. It's gotten completely out of hand. The percentage of GDP that government takes, and I don't know the numbers offhand, but it keeps going up. And yeah, it creeps up. But that's death by 1,000 cuts until finally it's unsustainable. And the U.S. $36 trillion debt, and the funding the debt, meaning the paying the interest on it. Imagine what you could do with all the hundreds of billions of dollars of interest payments if you actually had a proper balanced budget and paid off your debt, which is virtually impossible at this point, at least in the next 2 or 3 years. It would take a generation most likely to do it, and it will come to fruition. It also gives China incredible leverage over the U.S. To continue to fund the U.S. is continue to fund the UN is to do what Rand talked about a lot with the ultimate altruism, which was to fund your own destruction. We alluded to that on the show earlier today, but I want to leave people with that what we're doing is funding our own destruction. This is the same exact thing as the capitalist idiots, some of the most successful businessmen in the US and the world, who continue to fund their alma mater colleges. And the colleges are teaching nothing but DEI, critical race theory, and anti-capitalism. And yet the amount of money these people are giving to the colleges is incredible, in order for the colleges to teach the next generation how evil the capitalists are that are giving money to the college. That is funding your own destruction. Now, there have been a few high-profile cases and so on of people withdrawing money, but by nowhere near the numbers that should be. I mean, any businessman that's a capitalist that funds their liberal arts institution that has communists running the show is suicidal. There's no other word for it. That is what it is. Funding your own destruction. And the UN, it's exactly what you all said. It is a place where the West funds a bunch of autocracies and theocracies, the worst dictatorships around, human rights violators right and left. We complain about the US doing some rights violations in Gitmo. It's a joke compared to China. It's a joke. And forget about Russia. And then, of course, there's North Korea and so on. I mean, we all know this. But we're going to sit here and beat ourselves up and flagellate because it feels good. That's what liberals like to do, for the most part, is self-flagellate and say, I'm not perfect, so I cannot complain about anybody else. Instead of saying the great ills of the world are for most of the countries that are actually in the UN. And this is the reason that I hope we the US, and frankly, I would love to see the UK and the rest of and Western Europe withdraw from the UN. It is not serving the West's purposes, and it's time for the West to stop funding its own destruction.
Yeah. By the way, they're not perfect, but they're also not liberal. They call themselves liberal, but I don't know how they get away with that. But
true that.
But
it's like the United Nations, hardly united.
Yeah. And by the way, it sounds ridiculous, the idea that Britain or other Western countries would leave, but they often just, follow what the US does. I think, yeah, if the US does leave and the UN is whatever it will remain without the US, then there is potential for other countries leaving. And of course, you can have something similar, but that has a minimum requirement in terms of respecting the rights of your own citizens and not attacking countries and stuff. Daniel, before I go to you, let me quickly go to the super chats. Thank you, Roland, for another super chat. Roland says, if my boss told me no more meetings after 6 p.m., I'd quit my job on the spot. Yeah, ARCUK would be out of business if we ended the workday at 6 p.m. and didn't do weekends. Thank you, Enric, for the super chat. Enric says, the political world is dismal, yet there's a beautiful world to live and act in. Thanks for moral clarity. Thank you. And yeah, Daniel.
Well, it's always before 6 p.m. somewhere, so we can always work. Well, first, because Michael mentioned on how much US pays in the interest, it's almost $1 trillion. It's about 870 billion. That's just in net interest, basically just making sure the debt doesn't, or basically the interest on the debt gets paid off. Now I've seen some, when it comes to that, some sort of plans, sort of like 50-year future plans, and it is possible, but it's not possible without cutting Medicare, Social Security, or doing something about the mandatory spending. So while I appreciate any cuts. Even when it comes to the UN, I think America pays like 15 billion to the UN or something like that. So while definitely not like small money, we're still a long way towards balanced budget, even with that. Now I have come up with some ways of maybe how we can downsize UN. Maybe we can kick some countries, maybe just maybe kick all the dictatorships out and um, all the terrorist nations as well. Maybe Taliban should not get a seat anymore. Maybe we can start there. Maybe we can replace Antonio Guterres, just like get rid of the UN Secretary General and replace him with an AI chatbot that just puts out the tweet like we condemn bad things and Israel, and then we can just have that instead of him, so we can save on some salaries. Apparently, the UN does own the building that the UN is in, so yeah, that's a estate we can sell or rent it out. I think it's could be like a really good hotel. And yeah, I think there are ways to go. I like, it's sort of like Doge. We should be more innovative when it comes to these organizations and come up with more stuff. I pretty much have nothing serious more to say about the fact that UN is getting defunded. I hope it does happen, and I don't really care what's gonna happen next. I just hope we won't come up with some, new UN that's gonna be better than the old one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for, well, I would say I'm all for Daniel to be the next head of Doge, but we need him here at ARC UK. What would really be poetic justice is if ARC UK opens its US offices in what is currently the UN headquarters. But to do that, we're a long way away, but you can get us closer by becoming a member. There is a link in the chat. You also get access to many different perks, and the day will come sooner when we can move our offices to the UN current UN headquarters. All right, Alex, where can people find more from you?
I just want to say that Michael and I can do this exchange operation on the Cuban animals in the UN office in New York. That's something that I think I think I'm speaking for him. He'd agree with that. He'd be open, right? So I really recommend having a look at FDD, which is the Foundation for the Freedom of Democracies. It's a think tank and it has a lot of interesting information on the UN. They also did a whole podcast recently as well that also was discussing the UN. And it's a lot of people that we know actually are contributors and fellows there. I also recommend UN Watch because I'm in the same building as them, so why not?
Michael, where can people find more from you?
Yeah, Kaufman with 2 Fs on LinkedIn.
And Daniel, where can people find more from you?
My YouTube channel, Damned Dan. There are a lot of things happening in Slovak politics, so maybe I'll finally make another show on that.
TC says, Razi, you would make a better prime minister than Starmer. There is not enough alcohol
He would be gone quicker than Liz Truss. I mean,
to make me, yeah. There are better options than Starmer out there that can happen without me having to suffer. Also, I would never get elected, but thanks for the compliment. And I am better than Starmer on X at Razi Ginsburg. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for joining, and we are back tomorrow with the Daily Objective, probably on the Jeff Bezos thing, unless there is something else that comes up, and the reality show. We'll see you then.